Chapter 31. With all his heart, 3, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 31. Chapter 31, With all his heart, 3, Translator. Editor. Translated by Sean Su. Edited by Sudiao. The bell rang. When Juho looked at the clock, he realized that the first period had just ended. The classroom became rowdy, and Mr. Moon left the room. Juho stared at his paper. He had not written a single word. There were about 3 hours left at that point, and there were a few half-decent ideas floating around in his head. He needed something to bring it all together. There's still time, he murmured quietly. It's break time, so I should rest my mind for a little bit, he thought. He leaned against the rigid backrest of his chair. While he was idly staring at the ceiling, he heard Seo Kwang getting out of his seat, leaving the classroom unhurriedly. On the seat he left behind, there were bits of eraser dust and a sheet of gray paper. There was about 2/3 of the page written. Much like Juho, Seo Kwang had circled the word plaster figure. He had chosen the same topic. Juho tried to think about what he had been doing while his friend was busy writing, but soon, gave up and closed his eyes to calm his mind. My shoulders are too tense right now, he thought to himself. When he relaxed his shoulders, the rigidness of the backrest asserted itself. He was finally in a good place to write. The bell rang again. As soon as he opened his eyes, the distant noise rushed back into his ears. Some were complaining about the contest lasting for another 3 hours. Some were asking one another if they could read each other's paper, whereas some were busy protecting what they wrote. Some were simply complaining for the sake of complaining. All of those different emotions and voices mingled into a big mound, and that mound was a form of protest. It was a protest against fading away as they were and a protest to be remembered. As a proof, Juho couldn't help his eyes turning towards it. Now's not the time. As he was about to gather himself again, he saw Seo Kwang walking into the classroom. Seeing how his sleeves were slightly wet, he must have gone to the restroom. He sat down at his seat and took a brief moment to think. Soon, he started writing again, hard at work. His shoulders and elbows were moving. His body leaned slightly forward. He was concentrating. At a glance, he kind of looked like a runner in the moments right before the start of a race. As Juho stared into his back, he remembered something. I won the award. It was a fragment of a memory that had been worn out with only a small portion remaining. Inside, was Juho himself, taking the award as if he deserved it. At that time, he had already been bound to win the contest. It had been obvious. He had already been a professional writer by then. There had been some contestants who hadn't even been close to being amateurs. To them, writing had been secondary, and they had been busy playing around with each other. Some contestants had even submitted blank pages. The classroom had been twice as noisy, and he had struggled twice as much to concentrate. Back then, he had not been close to Seo Kwang. In fact, they had not even talked to each other. Just like he had been with Ina Jiang, Juho was disappointed in his past self. I see. Maybe, I've already disappointed myself, he thought to himself. He glimpsed down at his slippers. They were slightly dirty. He felt like he had been careful when he first bought them, but now, that didn't even matter. Out of the blue, he thought that the sound of kids talking resembled the sound of rain. In his mind, his shoes were already wet. There was a puddle in front of his eyes. Without hesitation, he jumped in. The water splashed in all directions. It was refreshing. He looked at his hand dripping with water and thought to himself, I might as well have some fun while I'm at it. Then, he looked at his blank page. Faint excitement tingled the tips of his fingers. Now, he was in a really good place to write. On a line that stretched endlessly, he wrote his first sentence. Okay, submit your papers now. His story came to an end at Mr. Moon's announcement. Fortunately, The ending was not as absurd as the protagonist dying from a head injury by monkeys raining from the sky. Well, I managed to finish in time. He was relieved that he had written something and put up his hands in the air and stretched. After waiting for the wave of kids that flooded the front of the classroom, he finally walked up to Mr. Moon to submit his work. Mr. Moon asked him, "You were serious this time, right?" "I wrote with all my heart." Mr. Moon had been emphasizing the end to him, but by that point, he had given up on that persistent absurdity. For that reason, Juho often heard him grumbling about his teaching career. He did feel sorry for Mr. Moon, but there was nothing that could be done. As he went back to his seat, Seo Kwang turned around with the backrest in between his legs. His hands were glowing red. Juho looked down at his own hands. They were the same. "I really worked my butt off," Seo Kwang said proudly. His concentration was actually quite impressive, even in Juho's eyes. His shoulders had been moving throughout the duration of the contest. It had almost looked like he had been putting in the same amount of concentration he invested into reading. It explained the satisfied look on his face. "How about you?" he asked. Juho answered him while rubbing his fingers that still glowed red, "Me too." Clap, clap, clap. The kids clapped insincerely. It was time to give out the certificates and announce the class winner. Everyone was lukewarm, from the awardees to the clapping teachers and students. Juho was one of them. As a gesture of support, he threw his hands up in the air. "Last, but not least, the winner of this essay contest is." The teacher took his time. The students kept their eyes fixed on his lips in anticipation. Whether they had tried or not, all contestants were probably hoping secretly that their name was called. That was the effect an award had. Whether one had fought for it or not, he longed for it. Similarly, Juho was listening for the winner with similar anticipation. Soon, the teacher announced, "Seo Kwang Kim." It was Seo Kwang. "Ha," he answered with confusion. It sounded like he was wondering why his name was being called. "Come get your award." "Pardon." He couldn't grasp this situation. He turned back to see Juho clapping for him with a peaceful look on his face. He had been certain that Juho was going to be the winner. Even with the white certificate in his hands, he stood absent-mindedly. He had all sorts of thoughts in his mind. Did Juho not keep his promise? Did he go easy on me? No, he's not like that. Then, what's this certificate doing in my hand? Why? Wait. Could it be? Did I really beat Juho with my own skills? Juho Wu. The teacher called for Juho. It was the very name Seo Kwang had been waiting for, and he prepared to clap for him. "Follow me to the staff room." "Yes, sir." Seo Kwang was confused. He needed somebody to explain the situation to him. He looked back at Juho, but he was simply smiling awkwardly. Leaving his confused friend behind, Juho followed the teacher to the staff room. There were teachers in charge of the first years. Students who had business with their teachers were allowed to come in freely. There was a laughter. A teacher and students had to be sharing a joke. It was quite different from where Juho was. He observed the teacher's desk. There was a attendance book, and fittingly, a math textbook. Next to them was a pile of papers from the essay contest. Juho Wu. Juho turned his head at the teacher's voice. He saw his familiar face. He was the math teacher who was not into books. For that, Juho felt distant from him both in the past and present. "Do you have something you want to say to the school?" "No, sir." "Are you struggling with something?" "No, sir." "Are you being bullied?" No. Although he knew that the teacher already knew the answers to his questions, Juho answered him sincerely, "No." From the time Juho walked into the staff room, the teacher had a dumbfounded look on his face. At once, Juho set aside his anticipation. He must have gone too far, after all. Then what's this about? The teacher pulled out a page that Juho was well acquainted with. A crooked circle was surrounding the word plaster figure. It was definitely his, and he answered as he saw it, "It's my essay." "No, that's not what I asked. I'm talking about this." "What's this?" he asked, pointing towards the middle of Juho's essay. Again, Juho answered as he saw it, "That's what I wrote." "That's right. You wrote this. Just to make sure, nobody forced you to write this, right?" "No, I wrote it." The teacher nodded. Then he read one of the sentences out loud. Perhaps he was conscious of his surroundings. His voice was just loud enough for Juho to hear. A pair of bonobos were having sex. They entwined their bodies for the sake of peace. Gender or numbers were not a priority. Skipping over. I always watch them. The moment they reach the climax. What he read was the intro. It was the part where a bonobo in a zoo was narrating from the perspective of a plaster figure in front of its cage. In the places the teacher skipped over, there was a description of the intercourse in greater detail. Juho did wonder if he would be able to get away with what he wrote, but he had decided not to change it. He had made a promise with a friend after all. Artistic, isn't it? Right. It's a shame that the school couldn't embrace your artistic value. He stood straight and asked a serious question. It seemed like he was finally about to get to the point. Do you watch a lot of porn? I do enjoy watching Animal Kingdom a lot. Bonobo. Primate Pongit. Mammal. The protagonist definitely explained Juho's fondness towards the show. The teacher decided to watch the show himself after work. You're in the literature club, right? Mr. Moon was very satisfied with what you wrote. That's a good news. Good thing I'm not going to have to listen to him grumble, he thought. I did enjoy reading your paper. I can tell that you're a good writer, but you won't get an award. You understand, right? We display winning essays in the hallway. Your paper is not suited for that, unfortunately. For kids your age, your paper does pack a punch both in terms of content and your skills. Juho nodded lightly. During a brief pause, the sound of laughter came from behind him. It was an innocent laughter. Think about your grades too. You're an amazing writer, but why is it that your linguistics grade is suffering? I think I did well, at least in my own way. That's not enough. Compared to his grades in the past, Juho was doing much better. Yet, it must have not been enough to satisfy his homeroom teacher. Satisfying someone was a difficult task. After briefly asking how Juho was doing, the teacher let him go. Pass this out to the kids while you're at it. Of course, he didn't send him out empty-handed. Juho left the staff room with a pile of gray leaves of paper, and he let out a faint sigh. Now, the only person left is Seo Kwang. I better give him an explanation, he thought. The end. Chapter 32. With all his heart, 4, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 32. Chapter 32, with all his heart, 4, translator. Editor. Translated by Sean Su. Edited by Sudiaol. As Juho was about to head over to class, something caught his eyes in the corner of the hallway. It looked like a person who had been rolled up into a giant ball. Recognizing the appearance from behind, he struck up a conversation. What are you doing here? It was Seo Kwang. What are you doing? I just had a flashback about my shameful past. He shoved his fingers between his hair and ruffled it. Seo Kwang was writhing violently. What brings you here? I followed you. Did you hear? I did. Seo Kwang had been following Juho since he headed to the staff room with the homeroom teacher. He had wanted to know the reason for Juho not winning the contest. He went into the staff room and pretended to be waiting for a teacher as he eavesdropped on the conversation between the two. It was hard to make out what the teacher was saying, but Seo Kwang was able to get a grasp of what they were talking about. After all, Juho's compositions tended to be provocative. He was relieved on one hand, but he couldn't bear the shame of thinking even for a moment that he had surpassed Juho with skill. In the end, he ran out of the staff room. He couldn't help but writhe in shame as he blamed himself. "I'm not sure what's going on in your life, but hang in there." It was an irresponsible encouragement. Seo Kwang remained crouched and said, "I was confused because of you. What did you write to be disqualified? Give it here." After a brief moment of thought, Juho asked, "How do I know you're not going to run off with it? What are you talking about? How provocative." After talking to the teacher, a small seed of hesitation sprouted in Juho's mind. The teacher had said it himself with a calm voice, "You did well. I enjoyed reading it." If Juho had been about the same age as the teacher, Seo Kwang wouldn't have been so shocked. Juho was old. As old as he was, he had experience. He was different from Seo Kwang, who was still in his reckless youth. He had probably thought to himself, "If I work really hard, I'll be able to write like him when I'm older." Juho thought about the time when Seo Kwang came over to his house. Seo Kwang hadn't been calm. He had no idea that it took Juho 30 years of blood, sweat, and tears to get to where he is. It might be a bit overbearing for underage readers. At his words, Seo Kwang quietly stood up. Then, he put out his hand. "I want to read it. Sincerely. You've got to follow the desires of your heart, right?" That was what Juho had said when Seo Kwang first opened up about wanting to be a novelist. Without saying anything further, he took his paper from the top of the pile and handed it to Seo Kwang. He watched his paper reach Seo Kwang's hand and went on his way. Seo Kwang stayed in the hallway and leaned against the wall. He paused briefly. His hands were getting sweaty. He took a deep breath and looked at the paper. Along with a circle around the word plaster figure, the page was filled with neatly written characters. In a single breath, he read Juho's heartfelt composition. The noise in the hallway faded away, and he heard the rustling sound of a bird in a distance. "Ha!" That was the first thing he said after reading the paper. "This is it. This is the feeling." A sense of satisfaction filled him up from deep within. That was the reason why he read. "This guy drives me nuts." The story was about a plaster figure who went on a journey to find his place in the zoo. It saw all kinds of things. Animals, people, love, peace, violence, murder. At the end, the plaster figure looked back at himself, his powerless self who could do nothing apart from getting moved around by others. The next day, the plaster figure was found shattered to pieces, and the story came to a bitter end. What a rascal. He has guts to write something like this at school. The story had a dark tone to it. It was filled with sex between animals, murder and violence. Yet, there were characters who loved and longed for peace in the middle of it all. Everyone was different. They each lived accordingly with their opinions. There was no right answer. Nobody was better than the other. And, at the end of it, was the plaster figure itself. So, who's the culprit of breaking the plaster figure? Seo Kwang imagined the figure shattered to pieces. Scattered debris. Broken shapes. There were no weapons of any sort within its proximity. The figure shattered its own shell. It broke the shell that was carved to look like somebody else and went on a journey to find its true identity. It was nothing like what it had been seeing. It was neither bonobo nor people. It never loved. It never knew peace. It was indifferent towards murder and violence. Seo Kwang looked out of the window. The figure was probably still on its journey. It had probably not accomplished anything yet. He imagined it wandering about the streets. He didn't feel any pain. "I'll join you." He took a step toward the empty stairway. Sun Hua won the award in our class. After gathering in the science room, the members started discussing the contest results amongst themselves. As Juho announced Seo Kwang had received the award, BOM responded as if she were looking to exchange results. She looked happy. Sunwa also proudly raised her hands in response, and Baron joined in. Did you get an award too, Baron? I know how to write. I just don't, he answered brusquely. He might not say much, but he said what he needed to. We did an amazing job. BOM exclaimed with joy. Every member did a remarkable job in their respective classes. After keeping his mouth closed, Seo Kwang said, so, I guess that means the three of us are getting fried chicken. I'm sharing it with Bomb. At Sun Wa's words, Juho added at once, then who would be so generous as to share their chicken? Baron. Seo Kwang Kim. Nobody answered. Kind of quiet, don't you think? It's a trend nowadays to have a whole chicken to yourself. Sorry, bud. A trend, you say? I had no idea you guys were so trendy. As Seo Kwang and Sun Wa quarreled, there was a sound of the door opening. A mouth-watering aroma filled the science room. Mr. Moon had brought fried chicken as he'd promised. He almost looked heroic holding bags of fried chicken in his hands. The two stopped their quarreling and cheered out loud. Juho clapped gently. I brought fried chicken. He put down the bags of chicken onto the desk. It seemed like more than enough for 3 people, and Juho counted 6 boxes. I brought some for the participants too. Let's dig in. Mr. Moon, you're the trendiest person in this room. That day, the literature club became one with fried chicken. The sky was especially blue. The clouds were slowly floating by. The sun was busy at work, trying to shine its light through the clouds. Juho looked up to the clear sky until his neck hurt. There was faint scent of sunscreen. It was BOM. Sun Wa and BOM sat together, applying sunscreen to their faces. Their movements seemed adept. Baron was with his sketchbook under the shade of a tree, and Seo Kwang was watching the ants passing by. At that moment, Juho saw Mr. Moon from afar, walking towards the club members. Mr. Moon, why are we meeting in the yard? We're running today, he said nonchalantly. BVEC there were other activities taking place in the schoolyard, like badminton or soccer. The literature club had reserved a portion of the yard. There were straight lines drawn on the ground, so it was a good place for a sprint race. Why are we running? Is this an endurance training? Sun Wa and Seo Kwang had asked simultaneously. Mr. Moon put his hand over his eyes to protect them from the bright sunlight and answered. From this moment on, you will sprint from here to there. Run until you're out of breath, and then we'll immediately pick up our pens. Write whatever sentence comes to mind first. Make sure it's full of life. It was a creative teaching method. Though he didn't exercise regularly, Juho was looking forward to running for the first time in a very long time. Again, Mr. Moon emphasized that it was a sprint race. Immediately after the race, the members would pick up their pens and begin writing. What kind of things would this race bring out? Juho wondered curiously. Stretch your bodies first. National exercise, go. While he drew the starting and finish lines on the ground, the members stretched. In contrast to the awkward movements of the first years, Baron went through the national exercise with swift and controlled movements. Are you running too, Baron? We'll see. I wanted to stretch just in case. Soon, Mr. Moon came back and told Baron, everyone's going to be running in pairs, but you're more than welcome to run on your own. I'll do it. Just like that, everyone participated in the race. Seeing everyone turning their wrist and ankles after finishing stretching, Mr. Moon said, now, why don't we start the race? Juho. Seo Kwang. Yes, sir. Hi. First up were Juho and Seo Kwang. The two stood next to each other in front of the white starting line. Once the cloud had passed the sun, the grains of sand sparkled brightly. When Juho moved his feet around, feeling the sand underneath, a dust cloud rose. There were sounds of the other clubs sharing the schoolyard. They were chanting here and there. "Are you a good runner?" Seo Kwang asked. It was obvious that he was probing his opponent, and Juho answered with a faint smile, "I'm alright." "You?" "I'm alright too." There was an odd tension between the two. Mr. Moon had a silver whistle of mysterious origin in his hand, and Sun Hwa cheered on loudly, "Woohoo." At her cheering, the students playing badminton looked in her direction. While the two were waiting for a starting signal, a soccer ball rolled toward them, and Seo Kwang gently kicked it away. It flew in a good direction. While that was happening, Juho took the time to stretch some more. "By the way, what should I write?" "Something like, 'My heart is thumping.' We'll see when we get to the finish line. What comes out will depend on our condition when we reach the finish line," thought Juho. The two positioned themselves. The white finish line was visible from afar. "All I need to do is run. No thoughts. With everything I got," he reminded himself. Mr. Moon put his whistle to his mouth. "Ready. Go." The whistle blew loudly. The signal resembled a scream, and the moment he heard it, Juho flexed his legs and bolted off. He felt his sight getting narrower by the second. Seo Kwang wasn't even visible. The shape of his surroundings distorted, and his body started wobbling. Yet, he saw one thing. The white line. "Run, run, run, with everything you got," Juho thought to himself every moment his foot touched the ground. The seconds before reaching the finish line, he heard Seo Kwang catching up to him and thought to himself, "I don't want to lose." "Goal," somebody shouted. When Juho reached the finish line, he couldn't see anything. There was nothing but heavy breathing. Juho slowed down for some time after he had gone past the finish line. His sides were in pain, and his thighs were sore. When he leaned forward, his heart thumped out of control. His wet, sweaty hair covered his sight. That moment, he heard Mr. Moon's voice, "Start writing." He grabbed the piece of paper that was next to the finish line. It was slightly crumpled, but he paid no attention. Then, he scribbled, "I'm dying." The end. Chapter 33. He's nearby. 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 33. Chapter 33, He's Nearby, 1, Translator. Editor. Translated by Sean Su. Edited by Sudiaol. Seo Kwang reached the finish line soon after and collapsed onto the ground. He, too, was quick to reach for a pen, but it wasn't long before he stopped writing. It couldn't have been a long sentence. "I won't lose next time," he said as he gasped for breath. "I'll be ready." "No, don't be." Juho couldn't afford to indulge in the moment of victory. He had beaten Seo Kwang by a hair, probably by less than a step. "It's kind of refreshing actually," Seo Kwang said as he stood up. "It's been a while since I ran like this." It had been different from running to measure endurance in PE. They ran with everything they had. They didn't let anything hold them back. An innocent competitive spirit sprung out of their hearts. Juho looked at his paper with the single phrase written on it. The result hadn't been so great. As the two were panting, Sun Hwa and Bom prepared for their race. "Hiya!" Sun Hwa shouted. The two girls had already passed the midpoint and were headed toward Juho and Seo Kwang. Juho watched them running desperately as their bangs flapped to and fro. When they were about 3 steps away from the finish line, they slowed down. They had already reached a finish line in their minds. There was a contrast between them and Juho and Seo Kwang, who only slowed down well past the finish line. In the end, Sun Hwa came in first and grabbed her side as she coughed. "Oh, my. I'm dying," those were the first words that came out of her lips. Bom staggered her way toward her piece of paper. However, she couldn't start writing. Instead, she had her hands on the ground, catching her breath. Ah! I'm dizzy, Sunwa said as she rubbed her side. Boem nodded. You guys are terribly out of shape, having caught his breath by the time the two were running toward him, and Juho, Seo Kwang said mockingly. Perhaps he wasn't aware of the fact that what went around, came around. Who was it that had gasped for breath just a moment ago? I saw you crawling, Sunwa mocked him back. As he was about to speak out of annoyance, Juho calmed him down and said. I'm beat. Can we do this later? It's Baron's turn. At his words, everyone turned their eyes to the starting line. His determination could be felt all the way from the finish line. He almost looked like a predator that had spotted a prey. Ready, go. As soon as the whistle blew, Baron strode ahead. Just watching him run felt refreshing. He was fast, really fast. He's so fast. What the heck? Since when was he so athletic? Didn't he used to be in the art club? As he ran past them, the four who kept their eyes fixed on Baron followed him. A wind followed Baron as he ran past Juho. His hair flapped. He's already here. As if he wasn't even tired, Baron calmly walked toward the other club members. He put his hands up and posed for his victory, and the freshmen looked at him with respect. The sole artist in the club not only had the writing skills to win an award for the essay contest, but he was also an impressive runner. He was multi-talented. Baron, that was amazing. I see why you wanted to run by yourself. Juho pulled a piece of paper for Baron as he walked toward him. You should write too, Baron. He stared at the paper for a brief moment and responded with a confident face, write this down for me. He resembled a gust of wind. It wasn't long before the adulation turned into jeering. Baron, let's go get some tteokbokki, stir-fried rice cakes. Tteokbokki. All that running is making us hungry. All the first years had already agreed to the idea, so Baron was the only person who had to be informed. He nodded willingly, and they decided to meet at a snack stand in front of school. What if I get sick tomorrow? I hardly exercise, so my muscles are probably not used to working so hard. You should have exercised more. Look who's talking. It is true that you're out of shape. Baron. You too. Everyone chimed in at Seo Kwang's exaggerated remark. Amid it all, Boem spoke up, you'll feel better if you massage your legs with a warm towel. At that, Seo Kwang answered as if he had met his savior, I knew I could count on Boem. She's always the first to clean up at the end of the day. From the snack party to the fried chicken party, Boem had always been the first person to pick up the trash. It was like a habit. At his compliment, she waved her hand in denial. She was the only person who wasn't aware that Seo Kwang was getting a kick out of seeing her uncomfortable. There she goes again. I'm serious. I just have a peculiar personality. If I see a mess, I have clean to it. It bothers me otherwise. You're so modest. Seeing her face flushing bright red, Sunwa spoke up. She said as she slapped Seo Kwang on the back, we all know Bomb's nice, so you should stop talking about it now. Juho saw Seo Kwang twisting his body in pain and chimed in, I knew this was going to happen. Baron responded, why didn't you do anything to stop them? They're not going to listen anyway. Besides, it looks good. What about it? The fact that they were able to play around with each other meant that they had gotten that much closer. It wasn't common in a club for the members to grow closer with one another as a whole. Being small in numbers definitely had its advantages. They seemed to be having fun too. Nobody complained about how Mr. Moon taught them. Everyone enjoyed writing. Juho remembered him saying that he had brought back the literature club to make school more fun, but there was no way a literature club could be fun. I'm so hungry. What are you going to get? Are you getting fritters? At Juho's words, everyone started thinking about what they were going to order. The members left the front gate and walked into the alleyway where the snack stand was. Juho was following them from behind. As he walked, he felt something foreign. Somebody had grabbed him. As he stopped in his tracks, the hand came off of him. "Hold up." It was a low voice. Juho turned his head to see a boy standing behind him. He didn't recognize the boy's uniform. "What is it?" As Juho stopped, everyone else stopped walking and looked back. They seemed just as confused by the appearance of that mysterious student from another school. Juho felt a slight wariness and asked, "Do you have a business with me?" "Yes," the boy affirmed. For a brief moment, Juho stared at his eyebrows. They were really thick. There was a brief pause and Seo Kwang stepped up. "You seem like you're from another school. What's your business?" The boy took a moment to look at Juho, his uniform, and his trail, then he opened his mouth. "I was told that Yun Woo is here." Yun Woo. Juho immediately took his eyes off the boy's eyebrows. "What?" Seo Kwang asked in a weak voice. What had just come out of that boy's mouth was just as random as his sudden appearance. Did he just say Yun Woo? Yun Woo. As in the author. "Yeah, I'm here to meet Yun Woo. Could you let him know?" Juho thought about where to begin. How do I correct him? Who told you that? Who said Yun Woo's here? What do you mean? This time, the boy had a confused look on his face. Who told you that Yun Woo's in our school? Everyone knows. I heard she's really pretty. No. Yun Woo's not a she, let alone pretty. Juho barely swallowed those words. The boy observed the situation and said, "I saw you guys running. I saw you writing something too. I asked the people playing badminton, and they told me you're in the literature club. Wouldn't that mean you know where Yun Woo is?" "I see," Juho thought. As he grasped the situation, he sternly shook his head. "The rumor about Yun Woo isn't true." The boy scowled as if he had just heard something unexpected. "I've heard some people even got an autograph." "That's true. By a girl named Ina Jang," thought Juho. "Some people have pictures of her too." He listed one evidence at a time. His desire to meet Yun Woo was apparent in his voice. Sadly, the rumor wasn't true. It's a long story. Anyhow, the point is that the rumor is a hoax. The boy stayed silent. It was apparent from a glimpse that the air surrounding him was sinking. He was easy to read. His thick overall build gave off a strong impression, especially his eyebrows. Juho turned his attention to his eyebrows again. It wasn't simply because of their thickness. He felt a sense of déjà vu. Where did I see that face? Those eyebrows look so familiar. I could have sworn I've seen him before. The boy suddenly asked, "Can you direct me to a police station nearby?" "Police station? I have a business to attend to." Business. He was a busy student, that one. After coming to look for Yun Woo, his next stop a police station. What's the business? This. The boy raised his hand. There were dollar bills folded in half. It was hard to count how many there were, but it was definitely not a large sum of money. Juho asked curiously, "Did you find that?" "Yes." "How much is it?" $3. What a surprise. Who would have thought there was a student like this in this age? This student was asking Juho for direction to a police station so he could return the $3 he had come across. Goodness. Juho felt sad that he was finding that boy's decision to be unrealistic. Maybe he had seen that strangely familiar boy in Good Samaritan of the Month on TV. As he was busy thinking, a voice came from behind. It was coming from quite far. He turned around and saw that the other club members were getting further away. "We're starving, so we're going ahead. Take your time." Before he had time to say anything, they had disappeared into the alley. Well, that happened. In the end, Juho and the boy were the only people left. Maybe I should invite him to join us while I'm at it, he thought. It was possible that he might be able to find the inspiration for his next book from that boy. He opened his mouth as the boy waited for an answer. Hey, can we eat something first? All that running is really making me hungry. The boy hesitated, but soon nodded. It'd be nice if you could tell me more about Yunwoo. By the way, how to get to the police station. Since he was interested in getting to know that boy, Juho accepted. The two made their way into a nearby fast food restaurant. As they waited for their turn, Juho asked, "Are you a fan of Yunwoo?" No, the boy shook his head without hesitation. After the unexpected answer, Juho made another question, then, "Why'd you go through the trouble of coming to my school to meet Yunwoo?" "I wanted to see my rival's face." At his confident declaration, Juho took a moment to think. Did I have a rival like this? Chapter 33, He's Nearby, 1, The End. Chapter 34. He's Nearby, 2, You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 34. Chapter 34, He's Nearby, 2, Translator. Editor. Translated by Sean Su. Edited by Sudiao. When Juho and the boy went into a common fast food chain, they were welcomed by its distinct deep-fried smell. There were part-timers in their yellow and red uniforms working busily at the counter. Juho got in line to order. The cashier seemed to be around his age, but it might have been her thick makeup. The line was not very long, so he was able to order quickly. His eyes met with the cashier's. Her eyelashes were smothered in black liquid, and he was given a non-verbal signal to order. She was quite unfriendly, but he ordered a combo meal, paying no attention to her attitude. "What are you getting?" "The same." Juho and the boy each paid for their own meal. As Juho finished paying, the boy handed her a $10 bill. With an insincere tone, she asked him to wait about 5 minutes and then handed him the change. However, he wasn't moving for some reason. "You didn't give me the correct amount of change." "Pardon? I'm supposed to be getting 40 cents, but you gave me 80. You must have gotten one of the coins mixed up." With a bitter look, the cashier took one of his coins back and exchanged them for the proper amount. There was definitely something different about that guy. Heck, he even tried to take $3 that he found back to the police station. He must not like getting any more or less than what he's due. After they each received their buzzer, the two went up to the second floor and found a table by the window. The restaurant was not very crowded. In the distance, there were two couples in their suits who appeared to be corporate workers. As the two waited silently for their buzzers to go off, the boy suddenly started talking. "What's your name?" Juho realized that they hadn't introduced themselves to each other. "Juho Woo." "How about you?" "I'm Pil Sung Choi." "I don't recognize the uniform." "Where's your school?" "I'm a freshman." "Are you older than me?" Pil Sung shook his head and said that he was in the same year. "I'm from a neighboring town." He made it sound like it was not a big deal. Seeing how he had caught Juho near the front gate, he didn't seem to know anybody at the school. He didn't seem like he knew the neighborhood either. The only thing that had brought him to Juho's school was a dated rumor about Yunwoo. He seemed like a doer. "So, you just blindly made your way here?" "I took the subway." Their conversations crossed, and Juho stopped talking. That moment, their buzzers started vibrating. He stopped Pil Sung getting up from his seat and went down on his own to pick up their meals. "You came a long way. Stay here." Since he was hungry, Juho took a big bite out of his burger. It tasted like how he expected. "So, is Yunwoo really not in your school?" "Nope. We did have an imposter, but she confessed," Juho explained without getting into a lot of details. "That rumor's kind of dated now. You must have heard it late." "I have no friends around." As if he were talking about the weather, he sounded humdrum. Juho found his attitude odd. He doesn't look like he's rough around the edges. Could it be his personality? Either way, it's not a good subject, he thought. He took a sip from his drink and asked, "So, what did you mean by rival?" "It's exactly as I said. I'm going to be Yun Woo's rival." He sounded determined this time. Yun Woo's rival. He could not look any more unrefined chewing on his burger. "Is that what a rival means to you? Did you think about Yun Woo's perspective?" Juho said with a smile. "That's why I came here, to see what that person looks like." "So, did you accomplish what you came for?" His thick eyebrows scowled a little. "I'm still not giving up being a rival," he said stubbornly. "How come?" Juho asked. "What do you mean? Why do you want to be Yun Woo's rival?" "Because I also write." Juho was slightly surprised. Of course, he assumed that the boy was also a writer when he first said the word rival. Yet, hearing it from him was a different experience. He was a writer too. He was Juho's age. Yet, he boldly declared himself to be Yun Woo's rival. Everyone seems to think of Yun Woo as this mysterious, unreachable person. Is that so? I'm not sure. You're not sure? After some time thinking, Pil Sung said, "My friend lives far away." His answer was far from the subject they had been on, but for now, Juho listened. "We'd been close since elementary school. We moved up to high school together, but we ended up in different classes. I adapted, but he was bullied." He picked up a French fry and put it in his mouth. "It didn't matter that I was at the same school. Even when I told the teacher, it only went as far as a warning. What's funny is that both my friend and I received warnings. Be aware of the trends. Don't show off. Get used to people calling you names that you don't like." It sounded like we were the ones at fault. I was so pissed, but the teacher was looking the other way. So what could I do? My friend ended up transferring to another school, and I was left alone. He explained that in the process of standing up for his friend, he naturally grew apart from friends he was close to previously. He was alone. That's when I saw the name Yun Woo. It was in the school library. I had been thinking about why things happened the way they had, but it felt like that name would give me an explanation. "So, did you get an explanation from that author, Yun Woo?" Juho asked. Pil Sung shook his head, "No, of course." He chugged his drink. Meanwhile, Juho ate a French fry somehow. Juho felt empty on the inside. At that moment, Pil Sung continued, "It was still comforting. You're supposed to be next to the person you're comforting. So I don't feel that Yun Woo is distant." Juho hesitated. "I wanted to be like Yun Woo, but obviously, I'm not Yun Woo. So I'm going to be his rival." It still didn't make sense entirely, but if that was what he wanted. After a brief pause, Juho took another bite of his burger. He was getting excited. Stay calm, he reminded himself. The lettuce in his burger felt refreshing for no apparent reason. The two quietly finished their meal. When they were down to a few pieces of French fries, Pil Sung asked, "So what's the literature club like? Do you have to run every day?" "Nope. We ran earlier because we were learning how to write vividly. You sprint with everything you have, and then you get to writing right away." "Well, I was dying, so I couldn't even finish my sentence." "That's unusual. Trust me. It's usually worse." Pil Sung seemed interested about the literature club, and Juho told him about what they had learned from Mr. Moon. Word gathering, transcription, composition topics, charades, etc. Not too long ago, Mr. Moon even brought his goldfish in its bowl. We were learning about catching external and internal characteristics of what we were seeing. Towards the end, he told us to write from the perspective of the goldfish. He thought about what he wrote then, gaping. "Feed me." It had been something to that effect. Pil Sung's eyes sparkled as he listened to Juho. Did you not join a literature club in your school? We don't have one. That's a bummer. I go to a culture center on the weekends instead. Sometimes, there are lectures given by famous authors. He listed the names of the authors. Dong Gil was one of them, and Juho was familiar with him. How was Dong Gil lecture? It was edifying for the most part. Half of the people were falling asleep though. It must have been boring. I enjoyed it. It kind of sucked that there were no breaks in between. Juho was able to picture the scene. Dong Gil had a tendency of being serious about every matter. He probably spent a lot of time preparing for the lecture. Then, he probably poured out everything he had prepared. Juho imagined Dong Gil delivering a lecture with his distinct, rigid expression. Actually, Dong Gil and Pil Sung are kind of similar in some ways, he thought. They were both sincere and doers. The difference was that Dong Gil was cold, and Pil Sung was hot. It was the difference between being cold-hearted and passionate. As he was in his thoughts, Pil Sung started talking. Can you show me what word gathering looks like? There's no reason for me to say no. Out of his bag, Juho took out a notebook and handed some of the pages with his writing over to Pil Sung. At that moment, his phone rang. It was a picture message from Seo Kwang. The picture was filled with the excited looks of the 4 club members with a large plate of tteokbokki in the middle. There was text underneath. I'm worried that you might be starving somewhere. Fritters were on the house by the way. By contrast, Juho took a picture of his nearly finished combo meal and sent it to Seo Kwang. Thanks for your concern, he wrote. Juho woo. Ha. Juho lifted up his head after sending the message. Pil Sung had come uncomfortably close to him, and Juho pulled away out of reflex. Pil Sung drew even closer with his hands on the table. What's gotten into him? Juho thought. Is there a problem? I've decided. You decided what? To be your rival. What? I want to be yours and Yun Woo's rival. I didn't know being a rival worked like that. While looking at his paper in Pil Sung's hand, he asked, Did you like what I wrote? Quite so. A direct answer. I'm flattered, but I'm not into rivalry. A rivalry is only valid and both parties recognize each other as rivals. Don't worry. My goal is to be a world-renowned novelist. Once I accomplish that, both you and Yunwoo will come to recognize me, whether you want to or not. I admire your confidence. Pil Sung wasn't entirely bluffing. The evidence was in the fact that he had ultimately accomplished his objective. He had wanted to see Yunwoo and he had met Juho. As Juho pulled away from that reckless boy, he suddenly realized why he had felt a sense of déjà vu when he had first met Pil Sung. Best-selling author, Sung Pil. Pil Sung. Sung Pil. Who's Sung Pil? Of course. Pil Sung Choi was Sung Pil. Juho had only seen his face in his profile picture before. Now, he looked much younger, and his eyebrows were much thicker. I knew I'd seen him before, Juho thought. He was looking at the face of a celebrity author as a teenager. The memories of Sung Pil slowly came back. Once the wall had come down, a wave of information flooded into Juho's mind. That boy was going to be the next big name author after Juho. He was Sung Pil himself, who debuted as a novelist at the age of 20. When Juho had wandered about the streets as a homeless man, Sung Pil had secured his place as one of the best authors the country had to offer. Juho smirked. That incredible author had come looking for him, wanting to be his rival. Maybe this is an honor. What is? Juho looked out of the window for a moment. The traffic lights had turned green. People were crossing the streets. Okay. From now on, I'm calling you Sung Pil. Why is that? Instead of an answer, I'll give you my number, as a rival. Juho took out his phone. Sung Pil asked no more and nodded with a joyful look on his face. Chapter 34, He's Nearby, 2, The End. Chapter 35. The Woman and Her Guitar. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 35. Chapter 35, The Woman and Her Guitar. Translator. Editor. Hey everyone, Sudi Owl and Sean Su here. We are loving the response you guys are having for the novel and for the work we are doing translating it. We come bearing some news that some of you might not like. As you know, The Great Storyteller is a Korean novel. Under Free Web Novel and Munpia's partnership to bring Korean novels to a greater audience, Munpia requested that their novels go premium after 40 chapters in order to protect their copyrights and for their authors' benefit. We hope that you guys stick with us as we watch Juho's future change together, but we understand if you are unable to. Thank you for your understanding. Translated by Sean Su. Edited by Sudiowl. Juho accompanied Pil Sung, who he now referred to as Sung Pil, to the police station. The officers gave the two a dumbfounded look, which made sense considering that teenagers had walked into a police station wanting to return the $3 one of them had found on the street. As a reward, the two had received a handful of candy. With a satisfied look on his face, Sung Pil popped one of them into his mouth. In the end, the $3 he had tried to return ended up in his hands. The two found out that there was a law for the lost items that stated that when a lost item was not claimed within a certain period of time, the finder was given the legal rights to keep the item. At that, Sung Pil asked the officers to hold on to the $3. The officers waved their hands to convey that that wasn't necessary. After going back and forth with the officers for some time, he ended up putting the money into a donation box to combat child hunger. After watching that strange scene for some time, Juho went home with a peppermint candy in his mouth. Haha. Aside from the word funny, there was no other way to describe what had happened earlier. He had read Sung Pil's book before. Every character had had a humane charm. The book had made its readers pity them, and at the end, root for them. Now that I think about it, the book was kind of like the writer, he thought. He was in danger, and it felt foreign. It almost felt like he was about to be swallowed up by a colossal wave if he didn't act. Yet, he wasn't scared. In fact, he was looking forward to this new future. Pil Sung's appearance had not been part of Juho's past. His life was definitely taking a turn, and thanks to Pil Sung, Juho's uncertain future was becoming more colorful. He hoped for a future where he discussed their works with his reckless friend. In order for that to happen, he had to survive in the world of literature. If he were to be pushed out like in the past, that future would never come. Juho instinctively reached for a pen. Why does a person live? He quietly asked himself. What was the meaning of living life? Before digging any deeper, he thought about whether he really existed. If people could no longer see or hear the person named Juho, he might be no different from being dead. There was a sound coming from the living room. It was the news. Apparently, somebody had won the lottery for a large sum of money. If one couldn't be heard, seen, or leave any trace of himself, did that mean he still existed? Of course. Even if it wasn't me, there's always somebody winning the lottery somewhere. In other words, wouldn't that mean that there are people living even in unseen places? There's no need to complicate this. He accepted his recently thought of impulsive logic. What would it feel like to win the lottery? He calmly put himself in that position. Various thoughts began to spring up. Happiness, fear, anger, will to live. Yet nothing reached the depths of his heart. I got nothing. Juho tore his hair out. He looked at the leaves of paper untidily strewn across the room. They were messy. They were his stream of consciousness. Something was left unfinished, and it was bothering him. I should try going outside. He changed quickly and then left the house for a change of scenery. He walked aimlessly over the hills and across the bridge. After waiting for the light, he walked past a building to reach a neighborhood park. Impulsively, he went inside. There were kids and parents. The park was big enough for a playground and a small stage, and there was even an elephant in the zoo. It's been a while, he said to himself. The elephant kept trying to go inside the enclosure, showing only its behind to the people watching in front of the cage. A child shouted, "Look over here." As if it understood, it lowered its head. The child started throwing a tantrum at his mother. The mother passively comforted the child. She was preoccupied with the even younger child she was holding her arms. The elephant was not going to lift up its head anytime soon, and the child's tantrum was certainly not going to change that. Juho went further into the park. In contrast to inside, where it was booming with children, the outside was quiet and calm. There were a few elderly people in places. The air also felt strangely calm, and Juho's pace naturally became slower. When he walked around the thinner-bodied trees, he saw the green lawn. Maybe I should hang out there, he thought as he walked toward it. Sadly, there was a long rope boarding it off. Keep off the grass. I thought grass grew the more it was stepped on, he thought to himself out of disappointment. After hovering around the lawn for some time, he eventually turned back. There was no other choice. No inspiration, and now I can't even go on the grass. This is not my day, he grumbled. As he was about to turn around, he heard a sound. What was that? It was coming from between an elderly person and the boundary of the grass. The path was still covered in brown leaves. It might have been the place where the street cleaners kept the leaves after raking. It almost looked like the time had stopped ticking in that area. The sound continued with a thin voice that could be lost in a whisper. He slowly made his way through the brown leaves and walked toward the sound. Yeehaw! The sound grew louder as he got closer. He heard a tasteful rhythm in between that did not suit the thin, delicate voice. Curiosity hastened him to get even closer to the sound. La, 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 there was a woman singing. La, la, tra-la-la. The woman had a guitar in her hands. She was singing amid the elderly. Along with the sound of the guitar, Juho was finally able to hear the lyrics. Well, there wasn't much to the lyrics. From the beginning to the end, la, la, la was the only thing that came out of the girl's voice. It sounded like she had replaced the lyrics with them. The woman seemed to be in her 30s, with average look and skill. Her playing was nothing short of an amateurish. One wouldn't be able to compliment it, even out of politeness. In other words, she was terrible. In spite of it, the elderly were clapping to her songs. They were loving it. After performing for some time with only la, 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 and she bowed to her audience to thank them. It was a professional. I guess she's not planning on performing through the night, Juho thought. As soon as the woman stopped singing, the park grew silent again. The elderly people left one by one, until there were only a few left. It was a strange sight. There was no wind. The leaves weren't blowing. The elderly weren't moving either. The woman walking down the stage was the only movement there was. Juho approached the woman as she opened her guitar case to place it inside. At the sound of his footsteps, she turned to look at him. Can I help you? The woman asked, wearing the guitar over her shoulders. It wasn't so much that he needed help. Seeing him hesitate, the woman started putting her guitar back into its case. Finally, he asked, Are you a singer? Nope. Aspiring? Nope. Hobby? How about this? She tilted her head as she was asked a strange question. Fortunately, she didn't seem to be bothered by Juho's questions. If at all, she seemed somewhat entertained. I'm in the process of looking for work. I couldn't find a corporate job, which is why I'm singing and playing guitar. So you're resting in a sense. It's tiresome to sing and play guitar. She emphasized that something tiresome couldn't be a form of rest. Perhaps that tiresome deed had a deeper meaning to her. Employment. Juho thought of what he had seen on the TV recently. A panel of people had asked a successful CEO, what are some ways that people who went to a no-name school can find a job? He responded, it's discrimination to be treated equally as those who went to a prestigious school. These people fought for the name of their schools. The camera showed the faces of those who were searching for a job after graduating from a no-name school. They seemed burnt out. Perhaps, people could still get burnt out even if they hadn't tried. Perhaps they're burnt out precisely because they hadn't tried. It was the punishment for not trying harder than the others. Juho wanted to ask the CEO one question, how do you determine the amount of effort you put in? Sadly, he couldn't get a response. After putting her guitar away, the woman stood up. She was shorter than Juho had thought. She had looked quite tall from afar, but it might have been the stage. So, why do you sing? There's nothing I really want to do, so yeah. She didn't have anything she wanted to do although she was looking for a job. After a brief moment thinking, she continued, I think there's a message I want to pass on. Like what? She thought for a good while. I'm not too sure. I might not want to do anything, but I still wanted to say something, the woman with a guitar said with a smile. I'm sure I'll find it someday, whatever it is that I've been wanting to say. What about the lyrics? I got a little shy in front of the audience. She seemed fine. What is she talking about, he thought. You're too shy to sing your lyrics. Yeah. I feel like they would know. What do you think they would know? Juho had to swallow the question. To a woman who didn't even sing the lyrics because of her fear of being known, it would be rude to ask anything further. Instead, he decided to rephrase his words, I have something I don't want people to know too. Don't we all? I guess so. Just like that, the conversation came to an end. Although there was nothing left to be said, the two didn't leave their spot. What else was there? Before Juho had a chance to ask her if she sang at the park every day, the woman quickly asked, how was it? How was what? My song. Is she looking for a compliment, he thought as he looked at her. Just like when she was on stage, there was no smile or annoyance on her face. She was bland. It made it hard for Juho to read her expressions, so he decided to answer honestly, it was mostly la-la-las, so it's hard to say. I'm sure it was. She was neither disappointed or annoyed and she replied calmly as if she had expected it. Seeing that, he couldn't help but ask the question he had kept himself from asking earlier, you said you want to send a message earlier. Are you afraid that others will know what you're thinking? I must be. A heart is a pain in the ass. Juho smiled at her use of strong language. When do you think they'll finally come out? Your lyrics. They'll come out someday. There is something I want to say. If she had figured out what she'd been wanting to say and found the courage to say it, would she be singing still? He asked himself. Are you going to keep singing? Of course. It's not like there's anything I want to do, she replied. Until when? Probably till I die. She smiled as she answered his question. It was an ordinary smile. Even if a person didn't have anything they wanted to do or had the courage to speak up about it, they'd go on living. They'd lead an ordinary life. With her ordinary smile, the woman finally left. In a space where nothing moved, Juho kept thinking on his own. What is it that she wants to say? What are the words to her lyrics that she desperately wants to hide? Whatever it is, it'll probably resemble her. They're probably just ordinary lyrics. Chapter 35, The Woman and Her Guitar, The End. Chapter 36. A Dream Gone By. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 36. Chapter 36, A Dream Gone By. Translator. Editor. Hey everyone, Sudi Owl and Sean Su here. We are loving the response you guys are having for the novel and for the work we are doing translating it. We come bearing some news that some of you might not like. As you know, The Great Storyteller is a Korean novel. Under Free Web Novel and Munpia's partnership to bring Korean novels to a greater audience, Munpia requested that their novels go premium after 40 chapters in order to protect their copyrights and for their authors' benefit. We hope that you guys stick with us as we watch Juho's future change together, but we understand if you are unable to. Thank you for your understanding. Translated by Sean Su, edited by Sudi Owl. I have something I want to say. The woman's words lingered in Juho's heart. A topic stemmed from a question. An author questioned every existence and its form. He had to acquaint himself with reaching a dead end. Writing wasn't the same as learning an equation or applying that equation as a means to find an answer. He simply wrote. If he wanted to, he could write about a phenomenon that was far from what scientific theories or physics could explain. For that reason, he had decided what to write about first. Worrying came first, and questions rose. There was nothing he couldn't write about, but he had to make a decision. Juho replayed his encounter with the woman at the park. He remembered every said word. Things she wanted to say, wishes, desires, situations, conditions. Finally, he smiled with satisfaction. He leaned his head back and took a deep breath. It felt like he'd got a hold of a clue to a puzzle. Nam Kyung came out of the office for dinner. The manuscript requests had made for an exhausting day. Making a phone call to an author had always been a nerve-wracking task. Still, he was proud of his achievement of successfully setting up a meeting. Ugh, my shoulders, he stretched and groaned in pain. I've been doing this way too long. He thought back to the time of his first project. The memory was still vivid. However, it was not pleasant by any means. In fact, it had been the beginning of his obsession with misprints. He had found a misprint the moment he had opened the book. It had been in the part when the name of the protagonist was revealed for the first time. All of a sudden, the character had gone through a name change. Every character had a different name for the protagonist. Even the protagonist's parents. How odd. Why didn't I catch this before? Nam Kyung thought. It had been an obvious mistake. He had read through the manuscript a number of times, yet, he had missed it. He hadn't caught it, and so had been in a world of trouble. To this day, his heart pounded when he thought back to the shame and despair he had felt back then. He shook his head. Everybody makes mistakes at first, he comforted himself. Maybe not that kid. Suddenly, he thought of an exception. It was an author who had been drawing massive attention from the masses. He went by the alias of Yun Woo. His real name, Juho Woo. Nam Kyung remembered his calm expression. There was something different about him. He didn't act his age. There was no awkwardness when he was talking to an adult. He didn't get intimidated. Normally, an author would be excited to know that his book was being made into a movie. Besides, they were in an age when kids were more used to moving images. Typically, an author Juho's age would be distracted by the fact that his own work was being portrayed by famous actors. The studio that had approached Nam Kyung about Juho's book was not a third-class, no-name studio. They had already proven themselves in the industry with a number of major works. Yet, Juho turned that offer down at once, and even declared that he didn't want his book to be made into a movie. Mr. Was the same way. Nam Kyung had had a similar experience with Dong Gil. He hadn't been able to hide his astonishment as he listened to Dong Gil and Juho's conversation. Juho, a 16-year-old, had spoken with Dong Gil on an equal footing. He had even seemed relaxed. He wasn't merely pretending to be an adult. That kid already possessed his own, distinct vibe. It was calm, yet it stood out ever so slightly. The adults in the scene had been completely captivated by it. On that day, Juho had been an author. Is that what all geniuses look like? It felt like it was out of reach of my understanding, Nam Kyung murmured as he stood up from his chair. After stepping out of his office, he headed toward a nearby restaurant. He was working overtime tonight and he had to head back to the office after dinner. He had to worry about the revisions he had fallen behind on, as well as his trip to Japan. He also had to send an email to a publishing company in the US about exporting copyrights. There was a lot to be done. Buzz. His phone rang, and he saw a familiar name on the screen, so he cleared his throat and answered it. On the other end of the call was a woman. For a woman, her voice was quite deep. "This is publishing copyright agent, Nabi Beck. The train is approaching." A voice came from above. It was telling that a train was coming in. People in line hardly moved from their spots. Finally, the train arrived, and a wave of people walked out of it. Another wave of people filled the train. People were dressed for a season between spring and summer. Some wore thick jackets, while others wore flowing dresses. Everyone headed towards the stairway simultaneously. People climbed the stairs in synchronized rhythm. Next to the stairway, was a long line of people waiting to be on the escalator. Juho sat on a bench where he could see everything happening in a straight line. Seo Kwang, Sun Hwa, and Bom were next to him. Baron was sitting on an inner bench. He was busy drawing something, his pencil moving about busily. With a piece of paper in their hands, the club members waited absent-mindedly for Mr. Moon. "It's Mr. Moon!" Sun Hwa shouted. With a bag of delamanju in his hand, Mr. Moon walked down the stairway like he was swimming against the stream. Before he reached the students, the sweet smell of the snacks reached them first. "Listen as you eat." "Yes, Mr. Moon," the members answered excitedly at the sight of food. People were glancing in their direction, but they were all going on their own ways. Juho's eyes had met with a person who had just been in the train before it took off. He had given the person a slight nod, but the other person had ignored him and taken out his phone. "Juho Woo, focus." "Yes, Mr. Moon." Mr. Moon had somehow caught Juho and drawn the attention back to himself. Juho listened to Mr. Moon as he chewed on a piece of delamanju. "Where are we?" "A subway station," Seo Kwang answered. It was not a difficult question. "Crowded, right?" "Yes, Mr. Moon." Juho looked at the people who had just come out of the train, and the people who were waiting for an incoming train. Women, men, children, adults, elderly, pregnant women, etc. The children were looking around the area. It was a station Juho had been to frequently. Yet, when he looked around consciously, it somehow felt fresh. At the club members' response, Mr. Moon nodded with satisfaction. People here have different starting points and destinations. Only the person who's on a journey knew where he was from and where he was going. Today, we're going to be writing in this environment. Don't just pass on a raw material because it's passing by. You shouldn't capture too much either. Maybe one or two, to be appropriate. Juho stared at a man who was walking toward the station to wait for the train. He was wearing a stretched-out T-shirt and a pair of sandals. He didn't seem to have a real job. Maybe he didn't have a job at all. Among the raw materials passing by, as described by Mr. Moon, this man should definitely be included. One thing. Only right up to the beginning of an occurrence. Beginning? Seo Kwang asked. Yes, Mr. Moon affirmed him and explained. A beginning is, as self-explanatory as it is, a start. You have to make the reader anticipate something before you reveal the conflict. He emphasized the word anticipate as he spoke. A beginning, so to speak, was a stage before the plot unfolded. It was like throwing a small pebble into the calm water. A ripple created by the author revealed what happened. It might not be visible, but its existence was apparent. Don't think about reality too much today. Just make it happen. Boldness is the point. You're only writing up to the beginning, so you don't have to think about how the story ends. You just gotta make it happen. Boldness, huh? What comes to mind when you think of the word case? Murder. That sounds more aggressive than bold, but good answer. The beginning of a murder case is the murder. You get my point. Think about where these busy people are headed, or where you want them to head to, Mr. Moon added. Make the most out of this environment. Think of ways to surprise these exhausted adults with your creativity. Now, start writing. Juho looked at the people once again. A train had come in and poured out another wave of people. The expressions were all generally bland. There was weariness and fatigue behind the blank expressions. Okay, think. What kind of bomb do I have to drop to change those faces, he thought. At that moment, he heard Sun Hwa's voice, maybe I need to drop a bomb or something. It sounded like her. That doesn't sound bad. Yeah. Should I just go for it? Sun Hwa responded to Juho with a smile. At that rate, she was actually going to set up a bomb. After hearing that, Boem said, I wish there were snow. Snow. In this weather. That would definitely be a case. Sun Hwa was surprised, and Juho accepted the idea. If she played her cards right, it had the potential for an interesting outcome. I feel like summer is approaching too fast. Do you think it's going to be weird? Whatever you write, it's up to the author. At her timid question, Juho answered and shrugged. If she wanted to write something, all she had to do was write. With his attitude in mind, Boem picked up her pen without hesitation. Seo Kwang had been inspired by Mr. Moon and decided to write about a murder case. Creating a story was not one of his strengths. How would things turn out this time? The subway station was quite chaotic. It would be hard to concentrate in an environment like that. It was noisy. It was crowded. An overwhelming number of people kept pouring out of the trains onto the station. At the same time, the trains were taking too many people from the station elsewhere. Juho thought of the woman with the guitar. She always sang songs without words and she had told him that she'd keep on singing. He didn't know her because he had never read her lyrics. Suddenly, he felt that it wouldn't be strange for her to be among that sea of people. She was a bland person. Even in the midst of an alien invasion, she might make them stop to listen to her songs. It was imaginable, and she had seemed like a difficult person to surprise. Unfortunately, nobody was actually like that. Everyone was afraid of something. Everyone looked dumbfounded when they were faced with unexpected circumstances. Juho wanted to portray such faces, just up to the beginning of a case, and it had worked well in his recent encounter with the woman. What kind of case should I face her with? What would she be afraid of, he thought. The moment she became afraid of something, she became a different person. She'd no longer be the woman with the guitar. Now, he had to think of a case. Another train arrived at the station. Another wave of people poured out of it ruthlessly. The environment was already suffocating by it being underground, and it became worse with each incoming wave of people. Even after the train took a large number of people from the station, the place was still crowded. Juho buckled down, and he felt Mr. Moon's burning gaze. For the moment, he picked up his pen. That day, he had a good feeling. Chapter 36, A Dream Gone By, The End. Chapter 37. A Dream He'd Been Waiting For. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 37. Chapter 37, A Dream He'd Been Waiting For. Translator. Editor. Hey everyone, Sudi Owl and Sean Su here. We are loving the response you guys are having for the novel and for the work we are doing translating it. We come bearing some news that some of you might not like. As you know, The Great Storyteller is a Korean novel. Under Free Web Novel and Munpia's partnership to bring Korean novels to a greater audience, Munpia requested that their novels go premium after 40 chapters in order to protect their copyrights and for their authors' benefit. We hope that you guys stick with us as we watch Juho's future change together, but we understand if you are unable to. Thank you for your understanding. Translated by Sean Su, edited by Sudial. Chapter 37, They dream he'd been waiting for. Maybe I should include less people. Staring at the subway station full of people was starting to get boring, so Juho revisited a recent memory. He had visited a zoo recently. It was a small zoo within a park. There had been a stubborn elephant that had refused to show its face to the crowd, and that image existed in the same space as the woman with the guitar. Yeah, an elephant sounds good, he thought. He tried mixing fear with the elephant in his mind. Words like subway, accident, and news passed through his thoughts. Crisis, terror. Terror. There were different types of terror in people's lives. The intensity of treatment varied depending on how much the person was being affected by their phobia. If a person who lived in a city had a phobia of deserts, treatment was not necessary unless they were planning on immigrating to the Middle East. Maybe I should go with that. Juho picked up his pen. Just like everyone, the woman had something she was afraid of. That was none other than elephants. Still, just as it was mentioned earlier, there was no major inconvenience. She had become a corporate worker, and corporate workers wouldn't typically be forced to be at a zoo. She loved music. As she listened to music like usual, she got on the subway car to work. The weather was pleasant, and she was in a good mood. Her work suited her personality. She had just passed her promotion exam and started dating. Her co-worker was too slow to catch up to her and was nowhere near threatening to her career. It had been a succession of peaceful days, and she no longer thought about what she was afraid of. Then, Juho added a line, "It's been 5 years since I stopped playing guitar, but I'm content." Everything she had achieved had been the result of her own effort. She considered herself strong. However, the essence of her phobia was waiting at the station, an elephant. That was the beginning of a development, and Juho didn't write about how she would respond. Coming to think of it, there had been a time when an elephant had escaped from the zoo. That elephant had walked into a restaurant, and since then, that restaurant's been running under the name, the Elephant House, he thought. There wasn't much substance in that thought. Well, at least I won't get an earful from Mr. Moon this time. The bell rang at the end of third period, and Juho headed to the science room. Mr. Moon was looking for him. "Man, you're in trouble," Co Kwang said frivolously. "I thought I was going to be okay this time," he thought with an awkward smile, standing up from his seat. Maybe he really was in trouble. When he entered the science room at the end of the hallway, Mr. Moon greeted him with a serious face. "Juho Woo." "Yes, Mr. Moon." As he came to realize that he'd never been alone in the science room with Mr. Moon, he noticed his tone. Since Mr. Moon was sitting where Juho usually sat, he had to sit on Bomb's seat, across from him. Because of the light coming in through the window, Mr. Moon was backlit, so he seemed like a shadow. He finally opened his mouth and asked, "Did you get a girlfriend recently?" "Nope," Juho answered at once. He had no time for relationships. There was barely enough time to write. Mr. Moon continued as he pulled out Juho's paper and put it in front of him. "Then how do you explain this?" On the paper, there was a story of a girl who received a confession from a man. She met her unfortunate demise after running into an alien in the mountains. On the same paper, Juho had written down the 3 keywords the day before. Confession, Mount Yuri, and computers. Those 3 words had been chosen randomly by Mr. Moon, and there were still remnants of that day on the desk, a ragged box filled with pieces of paper folded into smaller pieces. Again, thanks to his creative method of picking keywords, the words got trickier and trickier. Juho's mood and tendencies were getting gradually worse. Perhaps it was because the keywords had no correlation to one another. By the way, the female protagonist had received a confession through her computer from a man who she had never met. Mr. Moon accused in his shade, "You weren't this bad. I do believe aliens exist." For that reason, he probably wouldn't be surprised to hear about a person who had died after an encounter with an alien. Mr. Moon continued as he nodded, "So, is that what you wanted to communicate?" "Not exactly." "Then, what's this about?" It was the second time he asked for an explanation, and Juho answered honestly, "I can't control myself." My. There was no wavering in Mr. Moon's voice. It was as if he had been expecting an answer like that. Considering how long he'd been warning Juho to work on the ending of his stories, Mr. Moon's response made sense. He knew that Juho wasn't a rebel despite the lack of improvement. The shadow moved. It seemed like Mr. Moon was reading through the paper again. "You have a talent." Juho didn't say anything, and Mr. Moon continued, "Do you want to be a novelist?" Juho remembered the questions asked by countless reporters and journalists in the past. In midst of those questions, no one had asked him what Mr. Moon had just asked. He had already been a novelist then. "I'm not sure." As an author who had been hasty at one point in his life, Juho couldn't answer Mr. Moon's question. As he slightly lowered his head, Mr. Moon started talking again, "I wanted to be a genius writer." "Pardon?" Juho hadn't expected that. Mr. Moon paid no attention to his confusion and continued, "It's kind of cool. You don't do anything, but you're flowing with ideas. You write those into a book, and everyone loves it. Then, you get to have a confident smile on your face. Kind of arrogant, isn't it?" Juho spoke his mind. "Well, I wanted to be that arrogant bastard. I had talent too." He seemed like he was reminiscing about the past as he acknowledged his own talent. "Then, what made you become a teacher?" "I needed to make money," he answered bluntly, without a moment of hesitation. It was very Mr. Moon-like. Juho rephrased his question, "So, why couldn't you become a writer?" Mr. Moon answered with a bitter smile, "Because I didn't have it." What didn't he have? What's this "it" you didn't have? Leg strength. That had been an unexpected answer, and Juho was confused. Did he have weak legs, he wondered. A novelist is a special occupation. In what sense? All you do is pick up your pen, but you still need endurance. Physical labor is at the core of making a living as a novelist. It wasn't something he would say typically, yet he was very sure of it. Physical labor was a word that was quite distant from a word like genius. Is there a person you think of when you hear the word genius writer? Countless names raced through Juho's mind, but none of them fit the description of being a genius. He knew how much struggle and anguish went into writing a single sentence. Nope. Mr. Moon nodded. Yes, of course. There is no such a thing. What value does a God-given talent have before physical labor? I gave up because it was way too tiring. Juho smiled. He was able to relate to Mr. Moon. Writing was not an easy task. An author fell into a pit of shame on multiple occasions throughout the day. He felt ashamed and embarrassed about his writing. Yet, he had to face it. He edited and revised constantly. He dug through the depth of his being and came to face all the junk that was at the bottom. Although the junk started to contaminate the well, he didn't stop. This process spanned anywhere from months to a lifetime. It's like a marathon. No matter how strong their lungs were, a runner was bound to grow tired. At some point, they would fall. In that moment, talent wasn't what kept them going. It was their leg strength that supported them. It helped them fight through the exhaustion. That strength came from the heart. Then, what'd be an appropriate name to call authors who have the leg strength? Genius alone wasn't big enough to embrace all of those authors, so Juho asked Mr. Moon. He had failed and walked away from the path he had been on. Yet, he was smiling. He had lived on. That wasn't the only path there was to life after all, and he had started running again on a different path. Some things were more visible from the distance. If anybody knew, Mr. Moon would know something about this. He would know what was at the end of the path he had left behind. He answered with a genuine smile, a great storyteller. A gentle breeze rushed into the room. Juho took a deep breath and felt the breeze in his lungs. At the end of the day, there is no such thing as a genius writer. I was dreaming of something that never existed in this world. It's your freedom to dream. A dream allowed one to embrace things that didn't exist in the world. That was why people dreamed carelessly and envied. Juho reminisced about the past filled with anxiety. The word genius had disappeared in a moment. It had hid itself like a candle in the wind. It was such a fragile word. Soon, Mr. Moon was no longer in the shadow. His full figure had become visible again. What I'm trying to say is that the talent that you possess is not as useful as you think. Juho sat quietly with a smile, and Mr. Moon asked again, "Do you want to be a novelist?" Juho didn't answer immediately. He looked at his feet and then the ceiling. A novelist. The great storyteller. Yes. With a satisfied smile, Mr. Moon said, "If that's what your heart desires, then so be it." At the familiar remark, Juho couldn't help but laugh out loud. Mr. Moon couldn't achieve his dreams. He had failed and walked away. In a person like that, Juho had found a dream that he'd been waiting for all along. Things were different from how they used to be. He no longer wanted to be an ordinary writer. Though it sounded slightly childish and exaggerated, he wanted to be great, the great storyteller. Then start with your endurance, at least to the level where you can write without huffing and puffing after sprinting for a few seconds. Yes, Mr. Moon. Juho took Mr. Moon's advice to heart. As he thought of an exercise plan, Mr. Moon started talking while looking at Juho's paper. "Boy, kids nowadays are such good writers. Did you go to the same private institute as Yun Woo or something?" "I've never gone to a private institute." "Then, you're not Yun Woo himself or anything like that, right?" Juho quietly laughed off his unexpected remark. "That's not funny, Mr. Moon." After meeting with Mr. Moon, he realized what he had been lacking in himself. It was endurance that could keep him on his feet when something or somebody tried to bring him down. It would allow him to move forward on his own. He needed endurance when he wrote. The next day, he woke up at dawn and rubbed his heavy eyes as he got out of bed. After washing his face in the bathroom, he felt a little more awake. When he went out to the living room, his mother was there. She must have woken up with the sound of running water. "Why are you up so early?" "I wanted to go out for a run." "At this hour?" "Yeah, I wanted to work on my endurance." "Okay, be careful." His mother seemed somewhat surprised by his answer, but without saying much, she went back to bed. He put on his running shoes and went outside. He stretched as he looked up at the dark sky before the sunrise. In order to avoid muscle aches, he made sure not to make any quick or sudden movements. Once he reached the park, he started running. There were no cars or bicycles. There weren't many obstacles, so it was safe for him to focus on running without paying too much attention to his surroundings. The park itself was quite big, and most of all, he liked that there were very many trees. Ready, set, go. Chapter 37, A Dream He'd Been Waiting For, the End. Chapter 38. Pollen in the Air, 1, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 38. Chapter 38, Pollen in the Air, 1, Translator. Editor. Hey everyone, Sooty Owl and Sean Soo here. We are loving the response you guys are having for the novel and for the work we are doing translating it. We come bearing some news that some of you might not like. As you know, The Great Storyteller is a Korean novel. Under Free Web Novel and Munpia's partnership to bring Korean novels to a greater audience, Munpia requested that their novels go premium after 40 chapters in order to protect their copyrights and for their authors' benefit. We hope that you guys stick with us as we watch Juho's future change together, but we understand if you are unable to. Thank you for your understanding. Translated by Sean Su. Edited by Sudiao. Chapter 38, Pollen in the Air. 1. After signaling himself, Juho slowly picked up the pace. The park was quiet. The sound of his footsteps rang throughout. As he went further into the park, he smelled something similar to wet dirt. Rather than setting a strict route, he chose to run around the park, turning accordingly whenever he reached an intersection. From time to time, he saw the elderly sitting on wooden benches. Perhaps they came out to improve their endurance too, Juho thought as he ran, gasping for breath. I'm so tired. Still, he felt significantly better than he had in the past. His body had been pickled in alcohol then. Now, his body was filled with youth. It was a body much less likely to break. He thought about what had been on the news the previous night. The number one cause of death for people in their teens, 20s and 30s was suicide. With their healthy bodies, the young had no choice but to take their own lives. Gosh, I'm dying. His head was spinning as if he had inhaled too much oxygen, but he didn't stop. The distorted scenery slowly regained its shape. He was slowing down. Ha! He let out some laughter in between the heavy breathing and felt the corners of his mouth turning up. It was fun. Despite the slower pace, he kept running. Suddenly, he thought of school. Will I be able to survive through the day, he asked himself. Bah, whatever. He set the rest area in the distance as the finish line and kept on with every bit of strength he had left. What's with him? I don't know, Seo Kwang responded as he looked at Juho sprawled on his desk like a wet towel. Sunwa tapped him with her toes as if she were checking to see if he was dead. He looks really tired. Shouldn't we let him rest? Bom said timidly, but Sunwa didn't stop. Juho didn't feel like moving a muscle. Soon, he waved his hands in the air as he sat up. One side of his cheek was red from leaving his face against the desk. What? He asked as he rubbed his cheek. I wanted to make sure you were alive. I'm alive and well, ma'am, he calmly declared his survival. Now he understood what a dead battery probably felt like. After squeezing out every bit of energy, it closed its eyes with a sense of accomplishment. Though, he felt bad for the teachers. He'd been sleeping through his classes up to that point. What did you do last night? Come on, sharing is caring. You want to come out and exercise with me? What about that statement is sharing or caring? Exercising is nice and caring. All I need is enough strength in my hands to pick up a book. Did you exercise this morning? Bom asked. Yeah. I just ran around the park. You're so diligent. Nah, he'll probably last for another 3 days or so, Sunwa said after Bom. 3 days. Considering his condition at the moment, she might be right. He stretched his weary body. So, what brings you to our class? He asked with a yawn. Okay, but don't be shocked, Sunwa said. After making eye contact with Bom, they pulled out pieces of paper from their backpacks. They were transcriptions. Because of the multitude of new trainings exercises as of late, transcribing had been labeled as an independent activity. In other words, it was optional. We finished our transcriptions. Just wanted to show off. They must have chosen to write more. Her proud expressions made him think back to his high school days. It was adorable. Seeing something to the end accompanied a definite sense of accomplishment. To some, it might not be a big deal that they had transcribed an entire book. However, Juho genuinely celebrated with them. Seo Kwang looked at the stack of paper with envy. I still have a long way to go. You guys are fast. This is nothing. Mr. Moon complimented us too. He gave us some candy. Sunwa took out a strawberry-flavored lollipop from her pocket. Oh. I don't like strawberry-flavored things. Seo Kwang's weak rebellion came to an end with Sunwa scoffing at him. Juho thought as he rested his weary body on the desk, I should get back into transcribing. Though he had been making small progress, he struggled with consistency. Nevertheless, his writing was potent. Every element was primitive. When one stared into it long enough, it almost felt like he was being eaten alive. Without warning, it plunged deep into the hearts of the readers and then left them in the dust. Well, I should finish it at least. The two were smiling brightly, and Juho wanted to get a taste of that same joy. However, he completely crashed as soon as he got home. I knew this wasn't going to be easy. He opened his eyes to the sound of his alarm the next morning and the morning after that. That day marked his third day. He had been on the verge of giving up on the second day, but he couldn't go back to being lazy after one day. Whatever it was, he wanted to commit to it for at least 3 days. After washing his face with cold water, he dragged his aching body outside. I'm here. Hey, I'm here. Then, there was a guy waving his hand in front of the park. It was Sung Pil. He had been showing a strong interest since Juho first brought up his morning exercise routine on the phone. He wanted to exercise with him, in the same place. Don't you live far from here? Aren't you tired? It's not too far. I've been to this park a lot. Juho couldn't stop him when Sung Pil himself was so insistent. Still, the park feels different in the morning. Juho agreed. An object changed its appearance depending on the time. As he stretched, Sung Pil asked, "Where's your finish line?" "I'm not sure." "How's the rest area in the center of the park sound?" "There's a vending machine there too." Sung Pil nodded. He had understood Juho immediately. He really must come here often. "Do you exercise regularly?" "Yeah, my dad loves soccer, so I've followed him to his morning soccer practices a few times." His life was the opposite of Juho's. Juho had never been active. On the other hand, maybe Juho's lifestyle had enabled him to work consistently throughout his writing career. Be good to your dad. Huh. Oh, yeah, of course. Despite the slight deviation, Juho finished stretching. He waited for Sung Pil to finish warming up as his body moved up and down. After watching him, Juho asked, "Should we start?" "Sounds good." Then, Sung Pil stood next to Juho. "Ready, set," Sung Pil said. At his signal, Juho positioned himself. Sung Pil had a strong presence, and it felt refreshing to be running with another person. Juho heard him breathing in. It was the moment before the start. Go. The two simultaneously moved forward. Juho ran twice as fast as his usual pace. After running shoulder to shoulder with Sung Pil, he hesitated. At that rate, he'd completely burn out before reaching the finish line. He slowed his pace down. When that happened, the figure next to him also flinched. Sung Pil looked back. He was looking at Juho like he was taking all the fun out of the race. "You comin'?" Juho answered calmly, "I have my own pace. I'm goin' ahead if you don't catch up." It was a childish taunt, but Juho answered him with a nod and a chuckle, "Be my guest." At that, Sung Pil thought for a brief moment and shouted, "Ha!" He let out a strange shout every time he took a step. The elderly who were sitting on the benches slowly turned their heads in Sung Pil's direction. They didn't seem startled by him. The branches were shaking. "Well, ain't that something? How about you bring your voice down just a tiny bit? You're here." "Yes, I'm here, Captain Obvious," Juho calmly answered. "I told you, I have my own pace." "Well, this is my pace," Sung Pil shouted with excitement. "All right. Let's race." "Seriously, can't you talk quieter?" The two raced one another. Juho was running much faster than usual, but although he was running faster, he didn't feel like giving up. That time, Juho ran ahead of Sung Pil. "Since I'm running fast, I might as well run as fast as I can, he thought. Ha! Sung Pil followed with a roar. Juho put a bit more strength into his legs. Though the hill wasn't very steep, it was incredibly exhausting to run through. He was much more tired and running much faster than when he would run alone. It was also slightly more fun. He should have been slowing down by then, but he was still running. He didn't even think about that news report, which was evidence that he was focusing on the present. I can see the top. Sung Pil shouted. Before Juho realized, he had already caught up to him. I'm not blind, you know, Juho wanted to answer him, but his lungs had already reached their limits. Sung Pil was also breathing heavily. Their bodies were sending signals for the lack of oxygen. I'm dying. That moment, Juho's eyes met with Sung Pil's. At once, he picked up his pace, and Sung Pil did the same. They saw the white line at the entrance to the rest area in the distance. It was the finish line. By the time Juho thought that he was less than 5 steps away, his body had already passed the white line. As he crossed it, Sung Pil crossed next to him. After the race, the two threw themselves onto a wooden bench to catch their breath. They might as well kiss the rest of the day goodbye. I'm sorry Mr. Moon, Juho silently asked for forgiveness. Sung Pil was already lying on his back on the bench. Every time he breathed, his chest moved up and down. Juho giggled at the sight. At least no one's going to think that you're dead. Isn't that obvious since I'm not dead? Well, I guess so. I'm so thirsty. The vending machine is too far away. Seriously. Their eyes met again, and they raised their hands at the same time. Rock, paper, scissors. Dang it. Sung Pil squirmed from the shock of defeat while Juho sat comfortably on the bench and enjoyed his victory. What are you doing here still? I'm parched. Gur, after lingering around for some time, Sung Pil got up from the bench and staggered his way toward the vending machine. Juho saw him looking through his pockets to look for change, but for some reason, he returned empty-handed. He didn't seem too thrilled. What's the matter? I forgot my wallet. Sigh. In the end, Juho had to pay for the drinks. Okay, you came from far away, he justified himself. With gratitude, Sung Pil drank his water. Oh, yeah. Much better. Drink slowly. You'll choke. He was really enjoying his water, and Juho too quenched his thirst. A sip of cold water after exercising was as sweet as honey. Careful not to drink too fast, he slowly gulped away at his water. Have you been working on anything lately? Sung Pil asked. Juho answered after taking another sip of water. He thought of his recent work that had an animal from the zoo as the protagonist, elephant. An elephant. An alien. An alien. That moment, there was a thunderous sound. It almost sounded like it had come from an elephant. Juho turned to Sung Pil to look at him. He rubbed his stomach and murmured shamelessly, I'm kind of gettin' hungry. In the end, they even had breakfast together before parting ways. Nabi Beck was on edge. Perhaps excitement was a better way to describe her state. That year marked her 10th year in the industry. She was definitely not a rookie, and it had been a while since she had been that nervous. Nabi was an agent. Her job was to manage a number of authors in the country and to import or export copyrights. Though her work consisted mostly of importing copyrights, she had always had the ambition of making Korean books known throughout the world. Now, she was about to meet Yun-woo. Juho was a 1.A. kind author. There was no one like him in the history of Korean literature. Not only was he the youngest person to debut as an author, but his debut work was drawing massive amounts of attention. On top of that, he had remained anonymous because he was still a student. Do I finally get to meet this elusive author today? Chapter 38, Pollen in the Air, 1, The End. Chapter 39. Pollen in the Air, 2, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 39. Chapter 39, Pollen in the Air, 2, Translator. Editor. Hey everyone, Sooty Owl and Sean Sue here. We are loving the response you guys are having for the novel and for the work we are doing translating it. We come bearing some news that some of you might not like. As you know, The Great Storyteller is a Korean novel. Under Free Web Novel and Munpia's partnership to bring Korean novels to a greater audience, Munpia requested that their novels go premium after 40 chapters in order to protect their copyrights and for their authors' benefit. We hope that you guys stick with us as we watch Juho's future change together, but we understand if you are unable to. Thank you for your understanding. Translated by Sean Sue, edited by Sooty Owl. Chapter 39, Pollen in the Air, 2. When Nabi read The Trace of a Bird for the first time, she had already been arranging the introduction of the book. The book struck a fine balance between two contrasting subjects, growth and darkness. Along with its literary achievement, it appealed to the mass. Unfortunately, Korea was simply too small of a country for such a book. In order for the book to reach even more hearts, she felt that it needed to be distributed across the world. Once she made up her mind, she immediately called Nam Kyung, who worked as an editor at Zelkova Publishing Company. She had worked with him in the past on several occasions. He was a skilled editor. He was quick and easy to communicate with. While waiting for him, she picked up a cup from the table to quench her thirst. She set up a plan to meet with Nam Kyung at an Italian restaurant, where she arrived about 20 minutes earlier than the time they had agreed on. She checked the time. Any minute now. 17 years old, huh? She had never worked with an author that age. He's probably not used to such a professional environment, so I should be able to use that to my advantage, she thought. She wanted to be Yun Woo's agent. It was his first time at the restaurant. The neat interior gave off a clean impression. As he went into the reserved room with Nam Kyung, Juho asked, Nabi Beck, right? Yeah, do you have any questions? Oh, no. Just wondering. Nabi Beck was a familiar name. It was also a name he hadn't heard in a while. She had been the agent behind exporting The Trace of a Bird to 7 different countries. Other than that, she was good at what she did, but he didn't remember much of her. They had communicated almost entirely through email. Even that didn't last very long as Juho's career didn't survive past his debut title. It had been a bitter past. It was painful to think about the relationships that had been lost because of his limitations. I hope this lasts this time, he thought as he kept himself from sighing. What's she like? Nam Kyung answered after a brief moment thinking, she's good at what she does. She's also working with famous international authors. She's the type who likes to see things to the end once she sets her mind on something. Greedy. When Juho heard Nam Kyung's description of her, he was able to think of her image immediately. If that greed worked to his advantage, then there was nothing to worry about. For an author to have someone eyeing for his work was something to be grateful for. He concentrated on thinking about what she looked like. When they had reached the door to the room, Nam Kyung said, well, see her for yourself. He answered as he raised his head, I'm looking forward to this. He really doesn't act his age, Nam Kyung thought to himself. The door opened. There was a table, some patterned wallpaper, and a beautiful woman inside. She was Nabi Beck. Dressed in professional attire, she gave off an intelligent impression. The fog was lifting. As if a black and white screen changed to color, her figure became vivid. It's been a while. Hello. Nabi Beck, from Imperst Agency. Imperst was one of the 4 major copyright agencies in the nation. It was a large-scale company, and it usually worked with big.name authors. Nabi's eyes sparkled as she saw an author, and Juho definitely felt that she was observing him. Maybe she was simply fascinated by him. Now, her attention was on his face. He then remembered that she didn't judge an author by his looks. Juho Wu. I'd like to be called by my real name. Sure thing, Mr. Wu. He didn't stop her from addressing him with formality. In an occasion like that, he was aware that his age could work to his disadvantage. After a brief exchange of greetings, they ordered their meal. They each ordered pasta. The food looked incredibly delicate and appetizing, and it really felt like they were in a classy restaurant. You're quite handsome. Juho looked at his food subconsciously because of her sudden compliment. She continued as she emphasized, it'd be a waste to keep yourself hidden. I guess you're not entirely wrong, Juho answered with a touch of humor. Nabi seemed entertained. I've been curious this entire time. I was deeply moved by your work. Thank you, he answered briefly. He felt her observing his responses. As I expected, you really are a genius. If it were in the past, those words would have lifted up his spirit, but he couldn't keep himself from laughing. She misinterpreted his reaction and took the initiative to share her experience with his book, and he listened carefully. I appreciated how pure the story was. You did an incredible job describing fear in such a clear way. That wasn't all. The subject of death has always been a popular choice among authors. Everyone wants to know more about death after all. Many writers have been inspired by it, but sadly, it's no longer fresh. Frankly, I've been tired of it for a while, she added. Death, terror, anger. As deep and dark as these emotions were, they tended to leave a strong impression. When a drop of black ink got onto a white sheet of paper, all eyes would focus on it. In there was power and charm. However, without care and purpose, that dot was quickly reduced to a mere stain. The slightest movement would spread the ink throughout the paper and ruin it. It disrupted the white and became an obstruction to the eyes. Nabi looked at that boy in front of her and felt Yun Wu had drawn a perfect circle. It had been pure and controlled. She didn't spare any compliments. A child tended to be easily moved by an adult's compliments. However, Nabi's compliments were not merely empty words. She was meeting Yun Wu because she genuinely felt that his work was outstanding. Every character looks at the central subject of the book, the bird, from their own perspective. It's colorful, but balanced at the same time. In my opinion, your book has the power to move the hearts of those across the sea, regardless of country or ethnicity. A bird flies throughout the world after all, she said confidently. I'm certain that this book will do well overseas, she thought as she awaited Juho's response. However, his response was lukewarm, is that so? She was taken aback on the inside. He was much too calm for his age. Is he not interested? To be certain of her observation, she continued, I'm blown away by the fact that you were able to write such a book at your age. Sure. She patiently waited for his answer. There was silence. After a brief thought, Juho started speaking again, I think you've slightly overestimated my book. She kept her lips shut. Nam Kyung gently shook his head as he watched. Is that really the response of a high school student? He thought to himself as he was taken aback by Juho's attitude. Nabi was getting flustered. She thought about what she had said so far, I've been pouring out compliments. Even an adult would have been at least somewhat excited. She was planning on getting him excited, but something was wrong. His response was way too dry. On top of that, he thought she was overestimating his book. It was completely unexpected. Maybe he's the shy type. No, his expression is too flat. It can't be that he's hiding his emotions either. Who is this kid, she thought. They really know their pasta here, Juho said calmly as he brought the pasta to his mouth. There was no other sound in the room aside from Juho chewing and clattering his utensils. Nam Kyung chimed in to break the silence. If it lasted any longer, things would have been uncomfortable. So how's work been for you lately? I've been hearing that Mr. On's book is doing well in the American market. Ah, yes. He's been so cooperative to us, so it's been a breeze to work with him. He's so direct. It's almost scary. Is he still insisting on wearing his sweatpants everywhere? Yes. Aside from the first meeting, he immediately showed his true personality. Thanks to him, I don't have to dress up when we meet. Thanks to Nam Kyung's peaceful conversation with Nabi, the tension eased in the room. Juho chimed in their conversation, Mr. On. As in Seo Jong-on. Nabi answered quickly, yes. He's very popular. He's one of the authors I work with. Juho had taken an interest in their conversation about Seo Jong-on. Seo Jong was a friend and fellow author of Dong Gil who Juho had recently met. Unlike Dong Gil, Seo Jong hadn't put out a single book in the last several years. Juho remembered Seo Kwang's recent lamentations. Meanwhile, Nabi continued her story about Seo Jong. I wasn't too surprised to hear from a publishing company in the US. I was that confident about his book. If anything, I didn't hear from them soon enough. Your confidence is admirable. Her confidence really did shine. Juho had never met Seo Jong before, but he imagined that he must have seen the same confidence in her. The source of my confidence is in the author and his book. Her ambition worked to the author's benefit, and Juho smiled faintly. He preferred her attitude at the moment over her compliments. Mr. Wu, I want to introduce your work to a bigger publishing market. Nabi got straight to the point. It was the very purpose of that meeting. Yun Wu's book, The Trace of a Bird, was to be distributed throughout the world. Juho saw the confidence in her expression as their eyes met. He had been thinking all along, I want to work with her again. Of course, he answered. At that, Nabi smiled brightly. Pleasure to be doing business with you. The pleasure's mine. From then on, the three talked casually over their meal. After the main course, the dishes were taken away and replaced with a dessert made with fruit. While she looked at the plates, she started talking with a serious expression, so, let me briefly explain the US import market. By default, the US is on the stingier side when it comes to importing books from overseas. Imports make up about 3% of the entire market. Meanwhile, the percentage literature makes up is even smaller. It barely reaches 1%. We have to fight our way into that market through that gap. Literature in midst of international books, and literature among Korean literature. In the middle of that, Yun Wu. It was quite a narrow door. It doesn't sound like it's going to be easy. Yes. As you said, it's not going to be, but it doesn't mean it's impossible. Look at Mr. On for example. We've already experienced success. Can you tell me more about the process? How was Mr. On's book able to make it into the American market? Using her personal experience, she explained the plans and process of entering into the international market in detail. Juho nodded and agreed with her from time to time. He listened to her intently. We'll have our most trusted translator working on your draft. Translation is one of the most important aspects when it comes to exporting a book. I see. Glad to be working with you. Nabi smiled inwardly from the smooth conversation and quenched her thirst with a sip of water. Chapter 39, Pollen in the Air, 2, The End NV. Chapter 40. Pollen in the Air, 3, You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 40, Pollen in the Air, 3, Translator. Sean Su Editor. Sudiao. The chat regarding work was slowly coming to an end. The three rose from their seats and stood in front of the elevator that brought them to the restaurant. Nam Kyung and Juho waited for the elevator. At that moment, Nabi said in passing, then, I'll be waiting for the documents from your company, Nam Kyung. I'll give you a call as soon as I get them. Sounds good. Like I said, introducing a book overseas requires a lot of time and effort. It's a completely different process from domestic distribution. Of course. So, working with us exclusively is necessary to a certain extent. Juho looked at her, and she smiled. It sounds complicated, but think of it as a way to work more efficiently. You should be able to find the details in the documents I gave you earlier. Juho thought back to the past. There had been no deceit in her explanations. She wasn't trying to trick him, and Nam Kyung also listened to her quietly. Still, there's no way around the sense of burden that comes from the word exclusive, Juho thought. What would happen if the agency did something wrong? What if it went bankrupt overnight? What if they treated their authors like tools? What if they didn't treat him with proper respect? What if he didn't find out until it was too late? Of course, those were extreme scenarios that weren't likely to happen, but it was proper to take everything into account when signing a contract. The other party was asking for an exclusive partnership as an insurance because they were also under similar assumptions. It was about his own work. It was going to be made into a book that would end up in the reader's hands. That was what the contract was about. There was a weight to the matter that he hadn't been aware of in the past. He had to be cautious. In the past, he had done exactly as Nabi said, and there had been no loss. Yet, he'd never gotten to have a lengthier conversation with her. He hadn't discussed it in too much detail. He wanted to take a slightly different approach, so Juho looked at her briefly and said, "I'm not sure about that." Nabi asked quickly, "What are you not sure about?" "Oh, I don't mean that I can't trust you. It's just that I prefer to be cautious. I'll take some time to think about this more on my own." Nam Kyung didn't say anything about Juho's decision. The choice was solely up to the author. An editor or agent was essential to exporting a book, but more than anything else, what really mattered was the author's viewpoint. Nam Kyung didn't want to be an editor who interfered with his author's decision-making process, no matter the age of the author. Besides, he had been realizing that Juho was a person who shouldn't be judged by his age. He looked at Nabi and thought, she probably knows by now. Her lips tightened, but she soon regained her composure. "Of course. I understand. That's unfortunate." Despite her words, she didn't seem like she was giving up. It was his first vacation in a long time. Juho went to the park to see the woman with the guitar perform. She didn't perform on a set schedule, so he had to rely on luck to catch her concert. Yet, neither Juho nor the woman demanded each other's time. It must have been that their encounter had always been spontaneous by nature. After all, it wasn't like they had agreed to meet on a certain day. La, la, la la la. There were still no lyrics. She was just an ordinary person who was too shy to speak her mind. La, 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 la la. From her voice to her playing, she was average. Her clumsy playing was a plus. Still, Juho wandered about the park just in hopes of hearing her singing. He gently moved his body to the rhythm as he cheered for her. The woman glanced at his direction, but that was it. She didn't even wave her hand or smile. Yep, that's like her, as shy as ever, he thought. "Hello, Mr. Wu." At that moment, a nabi, butterfly in Korean, flew towards him. "Hi, you're here." "Yes, I am. I've never had a meeting in a place like this." She looked around. They were at the inner part of the park, so it wasn't all that crowded. Even the people who were there were mostly elderly. A woman was singing among them. "I could have gone to you. Oh no, I should be coming to you." Not too long after the meal, Juho received a call from her. As she gave him an update on the current progress, she asked, "When are you available?" out of the blue as they were figuring out a meeting place. "Anytime you want," Juho answered. As a student, he didn't have that many places he went to frequently. Then, he added, "How about a park? There's a cafe, a restaurant, a zoo, and a botanical garden. I think it's a good place for a meeting." Nabi willingly accepted his suggestion. Well, this is a first. Juho felt anxious whenever a pattern from the past repeated itself. He felt like he would be walking the same path, repeating every mistake he had made. To him, it was possibly even more scary than death. He wasn't afraid of failure. He simply wanted to be different from his old self. He didn't understand how he had been able to come back to the past. It was a miracle and impossible to understand. However, there were countless unseen things in the world. Many things existed without an explanation or without being discovered. For that reason, people had the privilege of imagination. Because of that, he had to do whatever he could with everything he got. The moment he let his guard down, he could spiral down the same destiny. When we're outside, I'll call you Juho. At her voice, he snapped out of it and nodded. Please, be comfortable. Oh no, you're still my client, she explained that she addresses all of her authors with respect. Is that like a rule? It's nothing fancy like that. I'm just expressing my respect. I'm fond of their occupation. Her expression softened as she said the word fond. She almost looked like she was in love. I believe you. Yes. I love books too, but what I really love is the occupation of an author. That's how I got into this field. I had enough respect for them to base my career around it. Normally, it was appropriate for the superior to address his worker with respect. It was a basic code when individuals met. Yet, that basic code was often overlooked. Do you talk to other people who are younger than you like that? Of course. It's basic courtesy, regardless of age. It was especially apparent when dealing with students. Most of the time, they had no experience in business because they hadn't gone out into the world yet. People usually didn't address students with respect. Whenever an adult called for a student with a school uniform, it was always in a casual manner. The students were used to that culture themselves. No student would take offense to an adult for not addressing him the way they addressed their fellow adults. Even if I weren't an author, she'd probably treat me the same way, he thought. There was a brief silence. At that moment, the woman with the guitar started singing again, and Nabi commented, her songs are unique. I agree. There are no titles or lyrics, but I enjoy them. The songs were sloppy and mostly humming, but they weren't offensive. That was because there was nothing artificial about them. There was a type of writing that was similar. The sentences were awkward, and the content was crude, but the heart wavered like the ocean. It was the purity that drew Juho and the elderly in the park near. In that small space, she sang with all of her heart. She must be wanting to say something, he said. Ha! The reason you enjoy her songs so much. Oh, right. Nabi wouldn't be able to understand. She knew nothing about Juho's situation, although both Juho and the woman with the guitar had something in common. They both wanted to send a message. Juho stood up from his place, and waved at the woman with the guitar before leaving her behind. Their eyes met for a brief moment, but she didn't stop singing. He saw a glimpse of her professional mind. I think this spot should do. Juho and Nabi went into a small cafe in the park. They each ordered a drink. There were no other customers, so there were plenty of seats. The two sat on the innermost seat. There were parents and children walking by from time to time. They all seemed to be in a good mood, and Nabi started the conversation after taking a sip of her drink. The reason why I wanted us to meet today was because I wanted to hear more about your book. She wanted to know more about Juho as a person. An agent wasn't only responsible for books but also its authors. They had to know about their authors to some extent. What kind of person is Yunwoo? She became curious. As she talked with an author about his book, she naturally learned more about them. She continued, there isn't a whole lot of information about you out there, so I'm quite curious. If you put it that way, I'm not sure what to say frankly. Did you have a question? I have tons. May I? Juho nodded with a smile. It's about the trace of a bird. As soon as he gave her the permission, she asked the questions that had been burning in her heart as a reader. In the book, the characters are almost always out and about in the dark. Burying a dead bird, a visit from the older brother. Yun himself kind of has an inner darkness. I wanted to know why you had set everything to take place at night. At night? Yes. She asked about the setting of the book. Juho thought briefly, but it hadn't been an intentional choice. He had decided to write The Trace of a Bird because he had thought of an ending for the story. It had almost shimmered before his eyes. For that reason, he had written his way toward that vision. In other words, the inspiration behind the night setting came from him impulsively wanting to isolate the protagonist. He wasn't the type to write out an outline for the plot of his book. There was always something unexpected in the process. Even if an author planned his entire process from A to Z, something always turned out differently in the end. Coming to think of it, maybe there was another reason for choosing the setting to be at night, he thought to himself. Honestly, it was mostly an impulsive decision. Impulsive? Yes, it just came out. Then what did you like about that impulsive idea?